Welcome to Boiler Wild. My name is Eric Johnson. On this podcast, I talk about boiler industry topics as well as personal development. They go hand in hand. Our career is part of our life, and I don't think our home life and our work life are two separate things. Our home life affects the work life, and work life affects the home life, and we should want to improve both of them. Boiler Wild. Wild is an acronym. You may be thinking that it's kind of a unique name, but Boiler Wild. Wild is an acronym, and WILD stands for work hard, invest in yourself, lead others, and develop yourself into a person of excellence. And the key emphasis on develop yourself into a person of excellence, we're going to be talking about reading and reading books and how reading is required, and also reading for training. And this funny, not funny story, once again, I recorded this episode yesterday and I went to edit it. And by edit it, I mean, you just cut out all the blank parts. I don't really edit episodes too much, but the episode didn't record and the recording was lost. And I should have known that because the website that I record podcasts with was, they had the banner at the top. We are experiencing issues. We understand this is an issue. Our team is on it, yada, yada, yada. But I didn't realize that recordings would be affected. And I guess there's something with Cloudflare issues right now. I don't know. I am not a computer guy. But we are doing this episode again, all over again. And I don't know if it'll be better than my first take because the first take didn't get recorded. So I have nothing to compare it to other than my memory, which is failing every single day. But I just want to start off with some statistics about reading. And according to Pew Research, which is probably one of the most recognizable research centers, 23% of U.S. adults have not read a book in the past 12 months, and that's partly or fully read a book. For men, that's 26%, women, that's 21%. And then they broke it down into education. So if you have a high school education or less, 39%. Some college, 17%. College plus, which is, I assume, a college degree or more, is 11%. So college educated people have the lowest percentage of people that have not read a book, which I find is interesting. And then they also broke it down into reported income. So if you earn $75,000 or more every year, you have 15% of people, and then 30,000 to 75,000 is 24%. And then less than 30,000 is 31%. So the people who have a high school education or less and make the least amount of money have the highest percentage of people who have not read a book partially or fully in the past 12 months. And that's not saying that you have to be educated to read a book, but that does show some interesting data that, there's a famous quote. Let me look it up so I don't butcher it. The quote is attributed to Mark Twain, who is an author from, I believe he was 1800s. If you don't know who Mark Twain is, you must have slept through high school, or you're just maybe younger. I don't know if they still read Mark Twain in high school. The quote is, the man who does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read. And so against the rest of the world, or the whole world in general, 87% of the adult population is considered literate, which increases significantly in developed nations up to 99%. I don't know what the definition of literate is, but we are not here to talk about reading level and everything else, but it is going back to that Mark Twain quote, if you do not read, you're no better than somebody who cannot read. And I think reading gets people think it's harder than it is, or they don't enjoy it, or choose not to enjoy it, or they tell themselves they're not a good reader. And while all that may be true, like there is definitely reading comprehension, most books are not written at a super high reading level. And by reading level, people or like the English language can grade out the use of words as in like third grade, fifth grade. And according to what I know, the best reading level to talk to people or write at is between third and fifth grade reading level. If you write above that reading level, you will lose audience. And I've always been interested in by like what an actual third grade reading level is. But it's not that you can't talk about complicated concepts. It's more of you just use words that are often used instead of using like weird terminology, or if you were to go into thesaurus and look up synonyms to like common words like huge or something, you would use the word ginormous. So some people may not know what the word ginormous is, but they would know what the word huge is. Anyways, going over to reading, you're like, Eric, what does reading have to do with boilers? So, number one, I would encourage you to read a book. And I actually have just finished Types of Boilers by the American School of Correspondence. This book was written in 1907. It is 78 pages. Very, very interesting about how they wrote about boilers in 1907, over a century ago. But as far as nonfiction books, so I would always encourage you to read a book that makes you think about topics and is nonfiction. I mean, if you want to read for fiction too, that's good too, but like a personal development business book, something like that. I am reading The Gift of Fear by Gavin D. Becker. And it basically is about like people's instincts, and you should always trust your intuition. Really, really interesting book. But the benefits of reading a book that you just kind of pick up and it's not required is huge. It gives you the ability to think about things and ideas that you may not be presented as otherwise. But I also think that reading is it's required to do well in life and to do well in your career. And if we don't read or practice reading, I believe it's a skill that has some perishability. It's not that you're going to not learn or you're going to forget how to read, but a person who reads books consistently is going to be a much better reader and have much better reading comprehension than somebody who never reads and avoids reading. So, you still might be wondering, why are you talking about this? So with training, there's been a trend, and I wouldn't say a trend, but there's a common misconception that people have learning styles. And so learning styles is a fairly new concept that was invented by somebody, I forget, but the learning style that technicians or operators often go to is, hey, I'm a hands-on learner, and any other kind of learning, I don't learn. And that is a self-limitation. That is your preferred learning style. But to say that you can't learn any other way would mean that you failed your entire education from first grade to 12th grade, because I know, at least in America, you sat in a classroom and had to read some kind of book and listen to somebody talk, and that is a way to learn. Now, you may not enjoy it, and I completely understand that, like, the difference between boys and girls, sitting in a classroom, there's tons of research about that, about like children, that like males sitting in a classroom, sitting still, is probably not advantageous for them to learn, but it is necessary to some degree. We can debate, how much that's required, but when I think about reading, I think we often allow people to not read, and then technicians or operators, then assume that in order to learn something that they have to be told it, or you have to show them how to learn the information or what the information is. So if I were to ask technicians, what is your preferred learning style, or how do you learn best? They're going to say on-the-job training, hands-on. That's the only way I learn, all that stuff. And while that's their preferred, that's also just often disguised as the easiest way to learn, but are we actually learning? And that's a huge if of, are we actually learning? Because the whole point of training, the North Star of training, is what can you actually do? DO, capital letters, underline, explanation point. What can you actually do? And what is your actual change of behavior from before the training to after the training? And you'll find, and I have found, that a lot of hands-on training is, while it's like a good experiment and it seems good, it's not actually structured to the point of like we're actually testing and making sure that we're having comprehension. And, I call it the semicircle of death. And I'll see pictures, or I've experienced it, where the instructor is talking about, say, a boiler, and they're pointing it to it in a lab, and there's a semicircle of people standing around with their arms crossed, just staring blankly at them. And while the instructor is telling them information, telling isn't training, and telling isn't learning. And you can't just tell people information and have them learn it. That's not how learning works. And it may be a good step to expose people, but then the necessary steps after that are not taken to make sure that they're actually comprehending what you are telling them. However, reading is essential to do well in the boiler industry. And by well, I mean to fix problems. If we train technicians and operators to, or I guess anybody, if we train them that they have to learn by somebody else showing them, if you don't show them, then they're going to have the excuse of, well, nobody showed me how to do it, so I didn't know, so I can't learn that. And that's a cheap excuse, and it's also an easy excuse. So a lot of training is done with one, hands-on training, and then two, like videos. But I think there is, and I know there is, a huge aspect to reading comprehension and being able to read about a subject and then answer questions about that subject or talk about it. And the biggest thing that comes up with is reading a manufacturer's manual. And that doesn't mean sitting down and reading the manual front to back. You could do that. The likelihood that you're going to do that, very, very low. But a manufacturer's manual is great to reference. And I don't understand the people who have the resistance to not opening up the manual. But if we, as a training, or as the knowledge people, I do training and help people, and if training doesn't involve the manual and making sure that people are reading the manual and answering questions. Like, so if a training class, instead of me saying, hey, I'm going to tell you this section of the manual, what if we took 10 minutes and you read and then you had to answer some questions or talk about what you read? So you can do that, but you have to have a discussion about it. A lot of people will just sit there and pretend that they read the manual and not give it an honest try. There has to be some kind of check at the end, and inherently, like, they should want to read and they should want to comprehend, but that doesn't always happen. Humans aren't perfect. They don't have perfect intentions, and some people are in this industry as a job and they have zero desire to improve, and you just kind of have to deal with that. But reading is essential. It is not optional. And I know if we avoid it and allow text to learn without reading and tell them that the only way, or show them essentially through our actions, that we're just going to make fancy videos and we are going to have lectures and that's how you learn. So once again, it tees up the idea that somebody has to tell them or show them how to do something in order to learn. And that's great and all, but you cannot show and tell a technician or an operator everything that they need to know, because the world of knowledge is infinitely expanding, and the basis of being a good service technician in HVAC or boilers or anything is having a core foundational knowledge and then being able to find the knowledge and understand it enough to be able to fix the problem. And that's mostly included in manufacturers' manuals. And if somebody never reads and has an aversion to reading and tells themselves that I don't read, and all the training classes they go to never make them read and just serves up platters of information, it doesn't set the technician up for success. And I think that's a huge problem. So one of the biggest lies or worthless pieces of information is asking technicians if they enjoyed a training class. And if the instructor has good charisma or tells good stories and they had good food and they had cool pictures and maybe they had a cool lab experience, like, the technician is going to say, yeah, I enjoyed the training class. But enjoying the training class is not a outcome that we should actually be testing for. The only outcome is, what can the person actually do now, or what is their changed behavior now that they went through this training? What are they actually learning and doing after this training? And if they can't actually do something, then it wasn't training. It was just information presentation. And a lot of training classes are feel good and don't actually hit on the actual doing part, and technicians enjoy them. And I would argue that proper training classes should be stressful to the point of where technicians don't feel like it's a vacation. A lot of training classes are viewed as a vacation from work, and maybe I get a fun lunch or a fun dinner and I can just sit here. If I learn something, great. If I don't learn something, great. But it's easier than actually having to work. And if you actually do training correct, it should be kind of stressful and mentally challenging. I'm not saying that it's going to be like a super stressful environment, but the person should be uncomfortable, because learning is uncomfortable. And if we cater every learning experience to exactly how people want, humans have a resistance to being uncomfortable. And if you tell somebody who's absolutely adamant, I only learn through hands-on training, and you have to tell me and show me something before I learn it, that is just a self-limitation that they put on themselves. And when you say, hey, you have to actually read this and this is how you're going to learn it, like, they will be uncomfortable and they're not going to enjoy that. But that is the only way to success, is showing them different ways of learning and not always catering to the technician, because the real world doesn't care. And a technician or operator has to understand how to read and how to comprehend material and how to gather information from either customer contacts or other company contacts and take that, comprehend that. Maybe they are telling them information or they've written down information that the technician is reading, like on dispatch software or something, and put all that information together and solve a problem. And that's really what, the HVAC industry, technicians of any scale, are doing. It's solving problems for customers that either can't or don't want to solve the problems themselves. And if we tell technicians that the only way that you can learn how to solve problems is have somebody else show you how to do it, then it severely limits their ability, and you are also reinforcing the ceiling that they've put on themselves of, I have to watch a video or it has to be hands-on learning in order for me to learn. Now, I'm not saying that you just say, hey, go read this book, and at the end of the month, tell me about it. That doesn't work. Like, there has to be a balance of everything. But if we avoid reading in the training process, and if we don't train through the manuals and reinforce that a lot of training is, like, a lot of material is written down. Like, for me, when I first started being a technician years and years ago, the first thing I wondered was, man, where's all this information? Like, it seems like there's just this cloud of information that all these people know, but like, where do I actually learn this? Like, where's the source of all this? And then I started cracking open books, finding manuals, and actually, like, reading them. And I'm like, wow, like, all this stuff that they're telling me, like, it's actually already written down, and it's not just these concepts that these people are making up. Like, this is actual written down information that I can actually read and reference. And when I don't remember something, I don't have to call somebody for them to tell me their opinion. I can actually just open up this manual and read about how this boiler sequence operation works. Like, that's a wild concept. And it seems dumb looking after the fact of, like, of course manuals would be, or like boiler books would be where you would find information, but you don't know till you know. And if somebody through the training process, which is typically hands-on, on the job training, you're not opening up the manual. They are just listening to somebody else tell them what to do. And that creates bad habits of them not being able to solve problems without somebody else telling them what to do. And that's how you get into people who show up to jobs and then immediately call for help because they have not developed the muscle of problem solving and comprehension. So where does this all go? So as a company, if you're an employer or a manager, you can do multiple concepts, and there's no one right way. And this goes back to a lot of leadership and culture in the company. If you have terrible leadership and culture, this is probably not going to go well. But if you have a solid foundation around it, then it could probably go well. But you can always improve, and you got to start somewhere if you do not have this culture. But if you have technician operators, something kind of like the field workforce level, you can say, hey, here's an optional, like, book report thing. Like, if you want to do this, we will buy you the book or something, and you got to fill this report. and write about it and do all this stuff and like make a project about it. Oh, and at the end, like, yeah, we'll give you $300 or something. You would actually probably be surprised at how many people actually finish that. You would think, oh, for $300, yeah, somebody's going to do that. But a lot of people will say they want to do that and then never actually follow through with it because reading is hard and reading requires some kind of comprehension. And it's easy to say you're going to read a book or read a chapter on something and then not do it. It's all about priorities. And then for like the management level or engineers and more of the office types, you can read maybe a leadership or a communication book or something like that. And even reading a communication book for the technician level, I would say personal skills or in communication skills are probably more important than actual technical knowledge at the technician level. Customers typically don't call managers and say, hey, your technician was so knowledgeable that I was so impressed and everything. They typically don't do that. They call and say, hey, your technician didn't know how to communicate with me and they just grunted and didn't want to talk with me. And they're writing on the service report, they wrote 4 sentences and you sent me a bill for $2,000. They were here for a day and a half. Like, what's going on here? Like, that's a breakdown of communication. The customer is more than happy to pay for it, but you got to make them feel good about paying for it. Like, did you write $2,000 worth of words? And even if you did some miracle, you have to express that through writing and communication to the customer. Otherwise, that miracle never happened. But for the engineer, sales, back office type of people, you can do maybe some leadership books, communication books, some kind of different book, and kind of do a book club and say, hey, as a company, we're going to read a book a quarter and we're going to talk about it. And you actually have to talk about it. It has to be this constant reminder, essentially, of bringing it up in meetings, bringing away takeaways. Like if you just say, hey, we're going to read a book and then nobody mentions it till the end of the quarter and then say, hey, did you guys read that book? It's probably not going to go over well. You actually have to, like, it has to be this constant conversation. And even if you say, hey, read this chapter by the end of next week or something, like give them 2 weeks to read 1 chapter in a book, which is highly doable. And, you know, maybe you can have a company library. There's all kinds of ways to do this, but then bring a takeaway of a chapter and don't just randomly pick a book. Like pick a book that you can talk about, have takeaways of chapters, what people think, and brings different ideas to the company. It opens up people's minds and hopefully makes them better to understand different situations and how you can improve as a company. That is another idea of ways that you can implement reading. But as far as the training, it's difficult to get people to read in the fact that if you have a classroom style of training, which is typically somebody makes a poorly done slide deck, stands in front with a TV, everybody sits in rows and sits there with their arms crossed, and the instructor just tells them information. Once again, telling isn't training, and they're not actually learning. You're just doing an information presentation. But outside of that, if it's hard and weird as an instructor to say, hey, we're going to take 10 minutes, everybody be quiet or something and read this. But I think I think it's very valuable. I also think it's very valuable if you give resources or you say or make it like a scavenger hunt in the fact that, hey, this is the problem, let's talk about it. But also, how would you solve this if we weren't in a classroom? And start going over like ways of solving problems without giving them the answer, because that's really what an instructor should be. The whole goal of an instructor is to guide people to the answer instead of just telling them the answer. If you just tell somebody the answer, then you get technicians and operators who just want to be told answers and can't make decisions by themselves. But if you teach a man how to fish, he will never go hungry. So if you do this like guided learning experience of like, hey, we have this issue with this boiler or something, where would we find this? And it's like, make this a class discussion, or you can also say, hey, take 5 minutes, find the answer, search the whole internet, do whatever you have to, like find the answer. I'm not going to tell you. And then tell me your thought process of how you would solve this and whatever. And it requires some kind of reading comprehension. They may look up the manual. They may look on the manufacturer's website. They may even find a YouTube video, whatever. And you'll say, well, YouTube videos aren't reading. But there is some level of being able to find the answer and then reading through and sifting through information. And if that ends up being a video, that's fine. But you should always want to teach, especially if the answer is in a manual, that they should reference and be able to find the manual. And it sounds dumb, but a lot of people don't know manuals exist or where to find them. And as an instructor or as a company, you need to make manual finding and manual reference the core of what you're doing, so that if all they do is train through the manual and train through resources and somebody knows how to find the answer themselves, then you start teaching them how to actually solve problems by themselves instead of just putting the answer on the next slide of the PowerPoint and then just flipping to that slide and then just talking about it. Like, that doesn't actually show them, even though that answer is in the manual and you say, hey, oh, it's in the manual, the actual process of going through and opening up the table of contents and finding it in the manual, like, that's actually valuable. It seems basic, but the basics aren't so basic. So that's one way to do it. With a couple day classes, you can't really do reading assignments, but you can do it as internal as a company. You can do reading assignments. I will say, don't fall into the trap of thinking that, oh, well, if we just buy everybody a book that they're going to read it. No, I remember talking to a manager a little over a year ago, and he was frustrated. He did a ride along with a technician and saw the book on the floorboard of the truck, and they picked it up and they said, hey, have you read this book? We bought it for you like 6 months ago. And they go, oh, no, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. And it was a paperback, so the binding of the book wasn't even creased, and it was like they hadn't even opened it yet. And in 6 months, if you haven't had a chance to read the book, it is just a priorities issue and not an actual time issue. Like, you make time for what is a priority, but you can't expect everybody, all technicians and operators, just to read a book on their own time, and if you never talk about it. So once again, you gotta once break it down. So say like, hey, if we buy everybody books, our next company meeting, service meeting, whatever, we're going to be talking about chapter 1, and we want you to write 3 paragraphs about how this applies, whatever, like put some structure around it. And you might get some pushback. You'll get some people who don't do it. There's always the whole thing of, well, is this required? All right, if it's required, are you going to pay me to read this book? Like, I need to be scheduled to read if you have people who think that way, it's probably a lost cause. I would say they're not a culture fit to being a technician. If you have to pay them in order to participate in reading, and this is not like, hey, you need to read a whole book by the end of the week, and you're going to spend 3 hours and go home. Like some people have some busy lives, especially as a technician or an operator who works like 12-hour shifts. Like, if you're already working 60 hours a week, it's not like you just have tons of free time, especially when you have a family. But that's why you need to put reading as a core function as part of like company communications and you talk about it and say, hey, in this book, here's an excerpt, read this, we're going to talk about it. And you constantly bring it up. You constantly talk about it. You bring it up in meetings. You bring it up in discussions and you talk about ideas. Like you have to reinforce this whole concept of reading and wanting to find information. If you don't do that and you just expect people to read a book, they're not going to read it just because you tell them or buy them a book. So don't fall into that trap of just thinking that, well, if I just buy them all the books, then they'll read them. That's not true. And you also just, I've seen companies say, well, we asked people who wanted a book and will buy it and who will read it. Well, everybody wants to seem like they are a go-getter and have good intention. And if you ask people to say, hey, who will read this book if we buy it for you? Most people will say, yes, I'll read it, but they have no intention of reading it. They just want to seem like they are doing the right thing. The actual people that are going to actually go out and read the book themselves probably already have the book. If it's a boiler related book or something like that, like they're already a go-getter, and books are $15 to $20. Like it, unless it's like a boiler textbook, even then it's maybe $100. You can get them used. But like somebody who doesn't want to read will always find an excuse, and somebody who wants to read will always make it happen. That is the core of it, but we need to bring back reading comprehension. It is essential. Learning styles are fake and a new-ish concept. There's no such thing as I only learn through hands-on learning or I only learn through you telling me. No, that is just lazy learning. And not to say that you can't learn through hands-on learning, but if you were to ask a technician, and I've talked to plenty of them, what is your preferred or best learning style? They'll always mostly say hands-on learning, and I want you to show it to me because that is the least method of resistance. That's the most fun, and you have to do the least amount of cognitive ability when somebody is showing you something, because while you may actually have to do it after, a lot of companies and training don't actually force people to do it after and prove that they actually learned it. They think that the showing concept is learning, and showing is not learning, and telling somebody information is not learning. There's huge differences in that. And you need to be mindful of that. But if somebody says, I only learn through hands-on training and I'm a visual learner, that is a self-limitation that they put on themselves, that they tell themselves. And believe me, I am a kinesthetic, hands-on visual learner. I need to see something, and I like taking things apart and exploring. I think most technicians are like that. However, when we say, well, that's the only way we can learn and we're just going to ignore everything else, now you just basically wrote off, hey, you're not going to learn how to read a manual and apply the concepts to what you have, the piece of equipment in front of you. Somebody has to tell you the manual and show you the manual, and then now you can do it. That's not possible at scale to be able to tell everybody the information and show everybody all information. You have to teach people to be resourceful, and being resourceful involves reading. And if the training process avoids reading and we don't practice reading comprehension, and the company never talks about reading a book or exploring new concepts, and nobody ever reads anything new, now you are going to get a pretty low level of workforce, I believe, in the fact that people just want to be handed fish instead of learning how to fish. And once again, it goes back to the, I've heard it time and time again, technicians just want to be told how to do things. They don't actually want to figure out how to do things. You have to teach critical thinking, and critical thinking requires reading comprehension, and it requires being able to crack open a book and read something, and be able to crack open a manual and read something. And reading is required, is not optional. And we can't avoid it in training, and all training is a thing that we do, not something that's done. And if you are a company manager or something like that, it's a continuous process. You can never cross off training and say, all right, we're trained on this, we're going to move on. People forget things. It is a continuous process. You have to constantly talk about concepts. If you don't feel like you're repeating yourself, you're not talking about a concept enough. You just because you told somebody once or 10 times doesn't mean that they've actually taken it to heart or learned it. And you need to tell them more and talk about more concepts. Just like if you were to do some training about like customer service skills and say, hey, we're going to shake the customer's hand, we're going to look them in the eye, we're going to ask them their name, you're going to ask them how their day is going, then you're going to ask what they think the problem is, or find somebody who knows about the problem and then ask this and ask that and document this. And then you're going to say, when they ask the question, well, how long is this going to take? Then you're going to tell them this. And then if you don't go through that process continuously and reinforce it, and then ask customers if your technicians are doing it and constantly reinforce that. If you just say, hey, shake the customer's hand and do this, and then you never practice it, never talk about it, your technicians and operators are not going to do that. So you have to feel like you're repeating yourself, and then maybe they will start learning. Same thing with reading. If you say, hey, refer to the manual, but then you just tell the answer to them, you're not actually telling them to refer to the manual. You're just saying that, and then they're waiting for the second part of, well, they're just going to tell me the answer. Say, hey, refer to the manual. All right. Call me back, or let's find the manual. I want you to find the manual right now and read about it, and then you tell me the answer. And that part of reading comprehension requires a little bit higher learning activity, and I believe that's absolutely required for a well-rounded technician or operator, for somebody who actually solves problems instead of just takes orders from somebody else. Because every company out there, I read a lot of job descriptions for hiring. They want a go-getter who is self-motivated and self-directed and able to go out and solve customers' problems without a manager or somebody else constantly checking in on them and guiding them. So, yeah, go out. Don't be a part of the 23% of adults who haven't read a book in the last 12 months. Go out, find a book, whether that's a boiler book or a nonfiction book about like personal development or something. Like if you need some other book recommendations, DM me on LinkedIn or email me eric.johnson@boilerin.com. I can give you some other recommendations on books. There's some great books out there like Atomic Habits. That's a really good one that I enjoy, about essentially how to create habits throughout your entire life so that you actually stick with them. But thank you for listening. If you've gotten this far, please rate the podcast 5 stars. Hopefully this wasn't just a rant to you, and that I did explain the concept of why reading is required and not optional, and why we should always push for it as employers, as trainers, to make people read. So hopefully I put all that in a bow. I'm still working on as part of doing this podcast, I'm still working on my communication skills, and being able to explain topics and work through things is an art. And the only way you do it is you practice it and get better. So that's what I'm doing with this, and trying to explain concepts and putting them together for you to listen to is something that I'm very, very new at and not super skilled. So anyways, If you got this far, I appreciate it. Please rate the podcast 5 stars. Please like it if you are on YouTube, or subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be having a few more videos out soon on my YouTube channel. And also I have a new training class coming out soon as well online. Look for that. Thank you for listening, and stay wild.